Hi guys, today I'm going to be talking about three different diplomacies, Theodore Roosevelt's, William Taft, and Woodrow Wilson's. So what I'd like you guys to do first is to open up this graphic organizer here, the three diplomacies, um, and then over here we have a really great quote by Teddy Roosevelt that says, "Do what you can with all you have wherever you are." I like that quote a lot. I don't know who Behavioral Health Works is, but thanks, I guess. All right, let's get started. So, why this matters? Um, the big question we're going to be asking is, how did U.S. and Latin American relations change under Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson? Uh, why this matters essentially is, have you ever asked the question why so many Latin American countries are so poor? Also, immigration. Why do you think so many people are trying to immigrate from South America, Central America, and Latin America to the United States, legally, illegally? Why? And lastly, intervention, 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 and lots more of intervention. So the U.S. is going to intervene a lot in the 20th century, like we talked about before. Oh, look, more intervention. Yeah, we're going to basically be involved in a lot of different Latin American countries and a lot of different Latin American governments during this time. So this is a map of U.S. military interventions in Latin America. It says at the bottom there's a total of 56. If you want to pause it here just to look at a couple, you'll see that Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama have the most. Although this doesn't include U.S. covert operations, meaning stuff that not even most Americans know about, or some government officials might not know about because it's CIA classified or other military intelligence agencies have classified it. So these might not be a total list here of all U.S. military interventions. Okay, so I want to talk about the Monroe Doctrine, which gets an upgrade during this time period. And on our right, we have Teddy Roosevelt over here. What the Monroe Doctrine is going to do is it's going to get an upgrade, kind of like, I don't know, Fortnite gets, a new version or a new season. The Monroe Doctrine is going to get a new version. It's going to get, version 2.0 or whatever. And if you remember correctly, the Monroe Doctrine says to Europe, hands off of our hemisphere, meaning we're going to control things in terms of military and economics in this hemisphere. Another thing is Latin American nations during this time are going to be heavily indebted to European countries. So, if you remember, there's a specific type of economic system that might cause this. It's an extractive economy. So, essentially, Latin American nations, all of their wealth and resources are getting pulled or extracted from the nation and basically sent to Europe. At the same time, European countries are basically investing and buying all of the telegraphs and natural resources of these countries. So these countries owe Europe money, but now have no natural resources that they can use to pay it back. So what happens if you can't pay it back? Well, Germany and Britain will blockade your port, meaning they're going to send their big navy to Latin America and say, hey, until you pay your debt, you can't leave the port, you can't trade with anybody else, so pay up. What Teddy Roosevelt over here is going to do is he's going to implement the Roosevelt Corollary, which is basically a fancy term for an updated Monroe Doctrine. So this is an updated version of the Monroe Doctrine. And what it means is the U.S. is now the police in Latin America. We'll handle it, Europe, so just stay on that side of the Atlantic. So that's what the updated Monroe Doctrine is going to do. What I want you guys to do for this is in your graphic organizer on any part of it, just fill out the questions on this. You guys can pause the video here to talk about it, but I'm going to move on. So, Latin American reaction to this. As you can see from this cartoon, this is a cartoon from the Latin American perspective showing basically Uncle Sam down here as this Slenderman-like creature with giant hands, kind of like a troll-looking figure. I don't know. It says Estados Unidos over here, and then Cuba. So it's showing the U.S. as kind of a predatory figure towards Latin America with these giant limbs and kind of oversized hands. And in the background, you can see these ships that are the coal-fired U.S. battleships. So the example I have for this is basically getting pulled over by somebody who doesn't speak the language, like Czech, let's say. I'm not picking on the Czech or the former Czechoslovakia. I'm just using them as an example. But what this means is that if you get pulled over by someone and you don't understand what they're trying to get you to do, like, you're speaking another language, you don't have no idea what they're saying, it's going to present some problems, miscommunications, maybe even violence. So what this means basically for the U.S. and Latin America is the same thing on a much larger scale. The U.S. does not fully understand or care about the history, the culture, or some of the customs of these countries, but they're going to try and police them anyway. So as a result, most Latin Americans will resent U.S. foreign policy. They want to police themselves. They don't want this giant, scary-looking man doing it. And according to Augusto Sandino, who's actually going to lead an uprising against the U.S. in Nicaragua, I believe, he's going to say the U.S. is threatening the sovereignty and liberty of Latin American peoples. So this resentment is going to lead to about a century of popular uprisings, meaning that people in the countries of South America, Latin America, Central America are going to overthrow or attempt to overthrow their governments. And the U.S. is going to help some groups, and it's going to attack other groups, depending on the politics or economics. Okay, so the different diplomacies. Taft is going to have an update to Teddy Roosevelt's big stick diplomacy. Taft didn't believe that the big stick approach was working as well, meaning using the military constantly as a threat was not having the desired result. So he wanted to implement something called dollar diplomacy. And what that means is instead of attacking countries, the U.S. is, or landing Marines, the U.S. is going to increase investments in businesses, banks across Latin America and Central America. So the U.S. is now going to own the plantations, mines, oil, and railways of those countries. So the question here, what would happen if those countries tried to take control of the resources? Well, what would happen is the U.S. will actually end up sending Marines or putting an economic embargo on that country if they try and take control of their own resources. So we will respond with military force or with economic sanctions. Just because we're using dollars does not mean we got rid of the big stick. So we still have a giant military. I mentioned Nicaragua earlier. You'll see in 1909 and 1912, the U.S. military will actually intervene to support a pro-American government in Nicaragua, and those are the U.S. Marines fording a river here. So, all right, Woodrow Wilson. So after the 1912 election, which he won, he implements something called moral diplomacy. So this is different than big stick diplomacy. It's different than dollar diplomacy. What it's designed to do is promote human rights, national integrity, and opportunity. So it's supposed to be a much nicer policy in general. He has a quote saying, "We will never again seek one additional foot of territory by conquest," meaning the U.S. is not going to try and invade any countries and take their land that way anymore. Sort of. As with most things in U.S. and any country's history, sort of. The U.S. will still intervene in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Mexico, and in Haiti's case, we won't leave until 1932, which is a very long time. And then, I don't know why I picked this is just a funny picture of Wilson. I don't know who made this. It makes him look like an angel, but he's not really. As you remember, Woodrow Wilson has some very terrible views on, African Americans or anybody who's not white. So the moral diplomacy still comes with it, the financial repression and military repression. So last thing, the Mexican government gets overthrown a lot. There's a couple different Mexican rebellions. These aren't super important for you to know, but I do want to provide you with the background. So first things first, in 1911, there was this guy named Diaz. He was a general, and he had the government in Mexico. He was in control. He got overthrown by a rebellion. And then another man takes over, Francisco Madero. And then in 1913, Madero's government gets overthrown by another rebellion. And General Huerta takes over. Well, guess what happens to him? Well, he's going to get overthrown too. But there's Diaz. there's Madero, and then there's Huerta. So we went from a general to a guy that doesn't look like much of a general to another general with all these fancy, medals. So what's going to happen next is the Mexican government gets overthrown. So General Huerta's government is going to get overthrown essentially by the U.S. because what we're going to do is land Marines in Veracruz, and when we do that, it basically destabilizes the Mexican government to the point where people just overthrow it. And the government is going to be replaced by Carranza. Carranza. I'm not pronouncing that correctly. I'm sorry. But he is going to replace the military-looking guy with kind of a less-looking militaristic guy. And at first, the U.S. is not going to like this guy at first. So we are going to support Pancho Villa, this guy, to overthrow Carranza. So the U.S. government is going to support Pancho Villa to overthrow Carranza, but then Pancho Villa raids a U.S. town in Texas and kills 18 Americans. The U.S. will invade Mexico, send an army of about 10,000 troops to invade Mexico. We will fight the Mexican army, and we'll also fight his personal army. We end up killing most of his men, but he actually escapes the U.S. military until about 1923. Somebody assassinated him, but we don't know who. And then the last thing I have for you guys today is I will put this up for tomorrow's assignment. The U.S. essentially is going to intervene in Haiti and the Dominican Republic. So I will have something for you to do with that tomorrow. All right. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. If you need to rewind this, go ahead. Thanks.